Hey, you can't be here. This is for real families, not— Security guard Derek Mills paused, eyeing Jerome Williams with obvious disgust. Whatever you're pretending to be. Mills stepped directly into Jerome's path at Stanford University's main entrance, arms crossed like a bouncer outside an exclusive club. Behind him, wealthy families in designer clothes streamed through the gates, their children's graduation caps bobbing in the crowd. Jerome stood perfectly still in his marine dress blues, 3 rows of ribbons catching the California sun. His leather portfolio hung at his side. At 52, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that only comes from years of military service. Mills smirked and spoke loudly into his radio, making sure nearby families could hear. Got another street person trying to crash the ceremony, probably looking for something to steal. 2 other guards laughed and shook their heads. Students walking past began pulling out phones. A few slowed their pace, sensing tension. Jerome's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd faced worse than this. Have you ever been judged by your appearance before anyone bothered to learn who you really are? Students walking past began pulling out phones. A few slowed their pace, sensing the brewing confrontation. Jerome's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd faced worse than this in Fallujah. "Sir, I have every right to be here," Jerome said, his voice steady and measured. "My son is graduating today." Mills laughed harshly. "Your son? Right! And I'm the Queen of England." He turned to his colleagues. "They always have some story." Jerome reached into his jacket pocket slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. He pulled out his phone, showing a text from 15 minutes ago. "Dad, ceremony starts at 2 p.m. Can't wait to see you. Deshawn." "Anyone can fake texts," Mills sneered, not even looking at the screen. "Marcus, call the real police. This guy's not leaving voluntarily." The head of security, Marcus Thompson, approached with the swagger of someone enjoying his authority. At 6'3", he towered over most people. His badge read, "Chief of Campus Security" in bold letters. "What's the problem here?" Thompson asked, though his tone suggested he'd already decided. "This individual is attempting to gain unauthorized access to a private university event," Mills explained officiously. "Claims he has family graduating but can't provide proper verification." Thompson studied Jerome with cold calculation. "Sir, you need to leave immediately, or we'll have you arrested for trespassing." "I'd like to speak with the Dean of Students," Jerome replied calmly. "The Dean doesn't have time for gate crashers," Thompson shot back. "You've got 60 seconds to walk away, or this gets ugly." A small crowd was forming. Parents in expensive suits whispered among themselves, clutching their children's graduation programs. Some looked uncomfortable, but most averted their eyes and hurried past. Maya Bennett, a journalism student, had started live streaming on Instagram. "Y'all seeing this?" she whispered into her phone. "They're literally blocking a veteran from his son's graduation." The viewer count climbed rapidly. 47, 156, 289 people watching. Comments flooded in. "That's a Marine uniform. This is disgusting. Where is this happening? Call the news." Jerome's phone buzzed, a text from Deshawn. "Dad, where are you?" "They're starting soon." 12 minutes until the ceremony begins, Jerome said quietly. "My son has been working toward this moment for 4 years. "Not my problem," Thompson replied. "Should have thought about that before showing up where you don't belong." Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the assistant dean, emerged from the administration building. She wore a crisp navy suit and the expression of someone accustomed to solving problems quickly. "What's the situation?" she asked Thompson. "Unauthorized individual attempting to access the graduation ceremony," Thompson reported. "Refuses to leave when asked." Dr. Hendricks barely glanced at Jerome. "We can't just let anyone claim to have family here. Our security protocols exist for a reason." "I'm not anyone," Jerome said, his military bearing never wavering. "I'm a father who drove 8 hours to watch his son graduate summa cum laude." Summa cum laude? Dr. Hendricks raised an eyebrow. What's your son's name? Deshaun Williams, computer science with honors in artificial intelligence research. Dr. Hendricks paused. She clearly recognized the name, but her expression remained skeptical. Even if that's true, you still need proper authorization to enter. What authorization would that be? Jerome asked. Guest passes are distributed to verified family members in advance, Thompson interjected. You should have received yours weeks ago. Jerome's phone showed 3 missed calls from University President Mitchell. He let it ring. Maya's live stream had reached 1,247 viewers. The comments were getting heated. This is Stanford University. Someone tagged the news stations. That man served our country. Where are the other parents? Why isn't anyone helping? A campus tour guide, Jessica, approached cautiously. Excuse me, but maybe we could just... Ma'am, please step back, Thompson commanded. This is a security matter. Jerome noticed something in Thompson's tone shift. This wasn't just about protocols anymore. This was about power, about putting someone in their place. Sir, Jerome said, addressing Thompson directly, I understand you have a job to do. I'm simply asking to attend my son's graduation. Nothing more. And I'm telling you, that's not happening, Thompson replied, his voice rising. Not without proper credentials. The leather portfolio in Jerome's hand felt heavier somehow. Inside were documents that would end this confrontation instantly. But something held him back. He wanted to see how far this would go, how deep the assumptions ran. 10 minutes, Dr. Hendricks announced, checking her watch. The ceremony begins in 10 minutes. More phones appeared in the crowd. The live stream viewer count hit 2,000. Comments were coming so fast Maya could barely read them. Jerome's phone buzzed again. Deshaun getting worried. Dad, I don't see you in the family section. Everything okay? How could he explain this? How could he tell his son that his father, a decorated Marine who'd served 3 tours overseas, was being treated like a criminal at his own graduation? The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd fought for this country's freedom, and now he couldn't even exercise his basic right to attend a public event. Ma'am, Jerome addressed Dr. Hendricks, if I may ask, what would convince you that I belong here? Her answer would reveal everything about who these people really were. Dr. Hendricks's answer came swift and cold. Proper identification from someone who actually belongs here. A faculty member, administrator, or registered family member who can vouch for you. Jerome felt the weight of institutional bias in those words. The burden of proof wasn't just on him. It was impossible for him to meet. A perfect catch-22. And if no one steps forward? Jerome asked. Then you leave, Thompson said, moving closer. One way or another. The crowd had grown to about 30 people. Some filmed openly now, no longer hiding their phones. Maya's live stream exploded to 3,247 viewers as word spread across social media. Campus police officers Rodriguez and Kim arrived, their hands resting casually near their belts. The situation had officially escalated beyond campus security. Gentlemen, Officer Rodriguez addressed the group. What seems to be the problem? Thompson puffed up with renewed authority. Trespasser refuses to leave university property. We've asked multiple times. He's becoming increasingly agitated. Jerome's eyebrows raised slightly. Agitated? He hadn't raised his voice once. Sir, Officer Rodriguez turned to Jerome. Can you tell me why you're here? I'm attending my son's graduation ceremony, Jerome replied evenly. Deshaun Williams, computer science, graduating summa cum laude. Officer Kim pulled out her phone, presumably to verify the information. She stepped away to make the call. 8 minutes, Doctor. Hendricks announced, her impatience growing. This disruption is unacceptable. Our families deserve a peaceful ceremony. The comment section on Maya's live stream was becoming a digital battlefield. This is Stanford University. They should be ashamed. Why won't anyone help him? Those ribbons look legit. Dude's a real Marine. Someone needs to call the local news. Hashtag Stanford shame trending in 3.21. A well-dressed woman in the crowd, Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison, approached Dr. Hendricks. Patricia, perhaps we could just... Elizabeth, please. Let security handle this. Dr. Hendricks cut her off. But Mrs. Harrison persisted. I know Deshaun Williams. He's been tutoring my daughter in calculus. He's mentioned his father is a veteran. Thompson shot her a sharp look. Ma'am, anyone can claim military service. We see it all the time. Jerome's jaw clenched at that. The stolen valor accusation stung more than the rest combined. Officer Kim returned from her call. Deshaun Williams is confirmed as a graduating student. Computer science, magna cum laude, not summa, but close enough. See? Jerome said quietly. That doesn't prove you're his father, Thompson countered quickly. Could be anyone who looked up a student's name. The goalposts kept moving. Each piece of evidence dismissed, each explanation rejected. Jerome's phone rang. The caller ID read University President Mitchell again. He declined the call, but not before several people noticed the name on his screen. Why is the president calling you? Maya whispered, still live streaming. Jerome didn't answer, but the question rippled through the crowd. Phones captured everything, his calm demeanor, the officials' increasingly defensive postures, the growing tension. 6 minutes, someone called out. Deshaun texted again. Dad, they're seating families now. I saved you a seat in the front section. Where are you? The front section, reserved for VIP families and distinguished guests. Dr. Hendricks noticed Jerome reading his phone. If you're really his father, why doesn't he come out here and identify you? It was a reasonable question with an obvious answer that nobody wanted to acknowledge. No graduate should have to leave their own ceremony to rescue their parents from discrimination. Because, Jerome said slowly, a son shouldn't have to prove his father deserves basic human dignity. The live stream viewer count hit 5,000. Someone had shared it on Twitter with #Stanford shame, and it was gaining traction fast. Officer Rodriguez spoke into his radio. Unit 47 requesting backup at the main gate. The situation may require additional presence. Backup? Jerome thought. For one man standing calmly in a military uniform? Thompson stepped closer to Jerome, invading his personal space. Sir, this is your final warning. Leave voluntarily or we'll arrest you for trespassing, disturbing the peace, and creating a public disturbance. Creating a disturbance? Jerome's voice remained steady, but something shifted in his bearing. I've said perhaps 50 words total. I haven't moved from this spot. The only disturbance here is your assumption about who belongs and who doesn't. Mrs. Harrison pulled out her own phone and called someone. David? It's Elizabeth Harrison. You need to get down to the main gate immediately. There's a situation involving Deshaun Williams' father. Dr. Hendricks shot her an annoyed look. Elizabeth, you're not helping. Neither are you, Mrs. Harrison replied sharply. The crowd was dividing. Some people, mostly older white families, seemed uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Others, particularly younger parents and students, looked increasingly angry at what they were witnessing. A black father in this crowd, Professor James Mitchell from the engineering department, started walking toward the group. His wife grabbed his arm. James, don't, she whispered. I have to, he replied. He'd seen enough black stories like this, enough real-life stories of discrimination disguised as policy. Excuse me, Professor Mitchell called out. I'm faculty here. James Mitchell, engineering. I can vouch for this gentleman if needed. Thompson whirled around. Professor Mitchell, with respect, that's not how this works. You can't just vouch for random people. Random people? Professor Mitchell's voice carried decades of quiet frustration. A decorated Marine trying to attend his son's graduation is random? Dr. Hendricks looked torn. Professor Mitchell had tenure and respect. His intervention complicated the narrative she was trying to maintain. 4 minutes, someone announced. Jerome's phone buzzed with another call from the president. This time he answered. Yes, sir? The crowd fell silent, straining to hear. I understand, Mr. President. I'm currently at the main gate dealing with a security concern. Thompson's face went pale. Dr. Hendricks stepped closer, trying to hear the conversation. No, sir, I don't think that will be necessary, Jerome continued. I believe we can resolve this professionally. He hung up and looked directly at Thompson. That was President Mitchell. He was wondering why I hadn't checked in yet for the pre-ceremony reception. The silence stretched like a taut wire. In the distance, the graduation music began to play. 2 minutes, Dr. Saad, Hendricks whispered, but her voice had lost all its authority. Jerome reached for his leather portfolio, his movements deliberate and calm. The crowd held its breath. Maya's live stream viewers spiked to 7,200 as notifications pinged across social media. Someone had recorded Thompson's interaction and posted it on TikTok with the caption, "Veteran blocked from son's graduation." Thompson's radio crackled. Chief, we have a local news van pulling up to the south entrance. They're asking about a discrimination incident. Shit, Thompson muttered under his breath. Dr. Hendricks grabbed his arm. Handle this, now, before this becomes a PR nightmare. But it was already too late. The touching stories of discrimination were being shared faster than they could contain them. Life stories of bias and prejudice were resonating across platforms, turning their quiet campus crisis into a viral moment. Professor Mitchell stepped closer to Jerome. Sir, I'm sorry this is happening. This isn't who we are. Isn't it? Jerome asked quietly, his hand still on the portfolio clasp. The question hung in the air like smoke. Perhaps, Jerome said, his voice carrying the weight of 52 years of similar moments. It's time we cleared up this misunderstanding. Jerome opened his leather portfolio with the precision of a man accustomed to ceremony. The crowd pressed closer, phones capturing every moment. Maya adjusted her live stream angle, sensing something pivotal was about to unfold. Inside the portfolio, nestled against black silk lining, lay several documents. Jerome selected one, an official letter bearing the gold seal of the President of the United States. Without a word, he placed it on the security checkpoint table. Thompson leaned forward to read. His face went through a series of transformations, confusion, recognition, then something approaching terror. The document's header read in bold letters, Presidential Appointment to Board of Trustees, Stanford University. Below that, in formal government typography, Jerome Washington Williams is hereby appointed to serve as trustee of Stanford University, with full voting rights and oversight authority over all university operations, effective January 15, 2024. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable, Dr. Hendricks grabbed the document, her hands trembling slightly as she read. The color drained from her face as comprehensively as water from a broken dam. Sir, Thompson stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. We didn't. Nobody told us. Told you what? Jerome asked, his voice still calm as morning water. Do I exist? That I have a name? That I might actually belong here? The crowd had fallen into complete silence. Even the graduation music in the distance seemed muted. Maya's live stream showed 12,147 viewers, the comment section scrolling so fast it was unreadable. Officer Rodriguez stepped closer to examine the document. His police training kicked in. He'd seen enough fake IDs to spot authentic government documents. The paper stock, the embossed seal, the specific formatting, this was real. Jesus, he whispered, Doctor. Hendricks found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Mr. Williams, please accept our sincere apologies. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Has there? Jerome's eyes fixed on her with laser precision. A misunderstanding? About what, exactly? The question hung in the air like an accusation, because they all knew what the misunderstanding really was. Thompson removed his cap, revealing sweat-dampened hair. His hands shook as he tried to figure out how to salvage a situation that had already gone nuclear. "Sir, if we had known—" "Know what?" Jerome interrupted, his military bearing never wavering. "Know my title? My position? Or just know that I'm a human being deserving of basic respect?" Professor Mitchell approached the table, reading the document over Dr. Hendricks's shoulder. His expression shifted from concern to something approaching awe. "Board of Trustees," he said quietly. That means, Jerome finished, that technically every person here, security, administration, faculty, reports to me." The live stream exploded. Comments flooded in faster than Maya's phone could display them. "Holy shit! Plot twist of the century. They just discriminated against their own boss. This is about to get real, Mrs." Harrison covered her mouth with both hands. She'd been trying to help, but even she hadn't understood the magnitude of what she was witnessing. Jerome reached into his portfolio again, withdrawing a second document. This one bore the letterhead of the Department of Defense. "Perhaps you'd also like to see my military service record," he said, placing it beside the first document. Thompson leaned over to read, his face going from pale to gray. The record showed Jerome's rank: Colonel, United States Marine Corps, retired. 28 years of service, 3 combat tours, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, Navy Cross. "Navy Cross," Officer Rodriguez breathed. "Sir, that's—" "The second highest military decoration for valor," Jerome completed. "Awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat." Dr. Hendricks was frantically texting someone, probably President Mitchell, trying to control damage that was already beyond containment. The crowd had grown to over 100 people. Word was spreading through the graduation attendees that something unprecedented was happening at the main gate. Jerome's phone rang. This time, he answered immediately. "President Mitchell," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, I'm at the main gate. There seems to be some confusion about whether I belong here." The conversation was brief, but every word was audible in the dead silence. "I understand, sir. No, that won't be necessary. I believe we can handle this professionally." He hung up and looked directly at Thompson. "President Mitchell sends his regards. He's wondering why his board member is being detained at the front gate instead of attending the pre-ceremony reception he was invited to." Thompson looked like he might vomit. Jerome pulled out his phone and showed the screen to the crowd. Text messages from President Mitchell stretched back months. "Jerome, looking forward to your input on the diversity initiative. Board meeting moved to Thursday. Hope that works with your schedule. Thanks for your insights on the Veteran Support Program." The messages painted a clear picture. Jerome wasn't just a board member. He was an active, respected participant in university governance. Maya's live stream had reached 18,000 viewers. Someone had shared it on Twitter, where hashtag Stanford discrimination was trending nationally. "1 minute," someone in the crowd called out. The graduation ceremony was about to begin. Jerome looked at his watch, a simple military timepiece that had survived 3 war zones. He'd been standing at this gate for exactly 11 minutes. 11 minutes that had revealed everything about assumptions, bias, and institutional prejudice. "Dr. Hendricks," he said formally, "as a member of the Board of Trustees, I'll be submitting a full report about today's incident to President Mitchell and the full board." She nodded frantically. "Of course, sir. Whatever you need." "What I need," Jerome said, his voice carrying the authority of command, "is for this to never happen to anyone else." He reached into his portfolio one final time and withdrew a third document. This one wasn't official government paperwork. It was a simple graduation program, worn from handling. Deshaun Williams, he read aloud, Bachelor of Science, Computer Science, magna cum laude. Recipient of the Department of Defense STEM Scholarship. Commissioned as Second Lieutenant, United States Army, upon graduation. The crowd absorbed this information slowly. Not only was Jerome a board member and decorated veteran, his son was following in his footsteps of service. He's been texting me for the last 15 minutes, Jerome continued, wondering where his father is, wondering why I'm not in the family section to watch him receive his commission. Jerome closed the portfolio and looked around at the faces surrounding him. Security guards who'd been ready to arrest him, administrators who'd dismissed his presence, officers who'd been prepared to drag him away. Gentlemen, he said to the security team, you have a choice to make. Thompson swallowed hard. Sir, you can continue to see threats where none exist, problems where there are only people, or you can learn from this moment. Jerome stepped past the security checkpoint, his authority now unquestionable. I'm going to watch my son graduate, he said. We'll discuss the systemic changes needed here tomorrow. As he walked toward the ceremony, the crowd parted like water. Some people nodded respectfully. Others looked ashamed. A few began to follow him, as if drawn by the magnetic pull of witnessing justice in real time. Maya ended her live stream with a simple statement. Sometimes the most powerful moments happen when people finally show you who they really are. The final viewer count. 23,156 people had watched a decorated Marine colonel reveal the depth of institutional bias at one of America's most prestigious universities. But Jerome wasn't thinking about viewers or viral moments. He was thinking about Deshaun, waiting in his cap and gown, ready to become an officer in the United States Army, ready to serve a country that still, too often, judged its heroes by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. The transformation wasn't complete yet. As Jerome walked across campus toward the ceremony, Thompson's radio crackled with an urgent message from the university's legal department. Chief Thompson, please report to the administration building immediately after the ceremony. Bring your incident report. Thompson knew what that meant. His 23-year career in campus security was probably over. Dr. Hendricks was already on her phone with the university's crisis management team. The live stream had been screen recorded and uploaded to YouTube. Local news stations were calling. The story was spreading beyond their ability to contain it. Jerome's phone buzzed with a text from Deshaun. Dad, I see you. Front row, just like you promised. Thank you for being here. He looked up to see his son in the distance, resplendent in his cap and gown, waving from the staging area. Deshaun had his father's bearing, his mother's smile, and a future bright with possibility. As Jerome took his seat in the VIP section, where his name had been on a reserved placard all along, he reflected on the morning's events. The discrimination hadn't surprised him. At 52, he'd experienced enough black stories, enough real-life stories of bias to know that uniforms and titles didn't always protect against prejudice. What surprised him was how quickly things had escalated when people felt empowered to act on their assumptions. The ceremony began with the national anthem. Jerome stood at attention, his hand over his heart, thinking about the distance between the ideals they were singing about and the reality he'd just experienced. But he also thought about change, about the 23,000 people who'd witnessed this moment, about the conversations that would happen tonight at dinner tables across the country, about the policies that would change, because sometimes, just sometimes, the right person is in the right place at exactly the right moment to make a difference. The graduation ceremony concluded at 4:17 p.m. As families dispersed across the manicured campus lawns, Jerome received a text from President Mitchell. Emergency board meeting, administration building, conference room A, 5 p.m. sharp. By 4:45 p.m., the key players had assembled in Stanford's mahogany-paneled boardroom. President Mitchell sat at the head of the table, his usual composed demeanor replaced by barely controlled crisis management mode. Dr. Hendricks clutched a manila folder thick with incident reports. Thompson stood near the door like a defendant awaiting sentencing. Jerome entered at exactly 5 o'clock p.m., still in his dress blues, carrying his leather portfolio and a tablet loaded with data. "Jerome," President Mitchell began carefully, "I want to start by offering the university's complete apology for what happened today." "Apologies are appreciated, Robert," Jerome replied, taking his seat at the board table. "But they don't address the systemic issues we need to discuss." Jerome opened his tablet and connected it to the room's presentation system. Numbers filled the wall-mounted screen. "Stanford University operates on a $7.3 billion endowment," Jerome began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd briefed generals. "We receive $1.2 billion annually in federal funding, including $847 million in research grants." Thompson shifted uncomfortably. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about his job anymore. "Of that federal funding," Jerome continued, 28% is contingent on compliance with federal civil rights legislation, including Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Dr. Hendricks opened her folder, frantically searching for documentation that might help her position. Under federal compliance regulations, Jerome's presentation showed in the legal text, institutions receiving federal funds must demonstrate good faith efforts to prevent discrimination. Failure to do so can result in funding suspension. President Mitchell leaned forward. "Jerome, what are you proposing?" "I'm not proposing anything, Robert. I'm stating facts." Jerome clicked to the next slide. "Today's incident was live-streamed to 23,156 viewers. It's been shared 8,400 times on social media. Local news stations have requested statements. The Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights received 17 formal complaints before the ceremony even ended." The room fell silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Jerome pulled up Stanford's employee handbook on screen. Section 4.7, Standards of Professional Conduct. Subsection C, discriminatory behavior based on race, religion, or national origin constitutes grounds for immediate termination. Thompson's face had gone ashen. His pension, his benefits, his 23-year career, everything was on the table. "Mr. Thompson," Jerome addressed him directly, "can you explain your actions today within the context of university policy?" Thompson cleared his throat, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, we were following standard security protocols." "Standard protocols?" Jerome queried. "Let's examine those protocols." He clicked on a new slide showing Stanford's actual security guidelines. The relevant section was highlighted in red. "Security personnel will treat all visitors with courtesy and respect, requesting identification only when specific safety concerns arise." "What specific safety concerns did I present?" Jerome asked. Thompson had no answer. Jerome continued his methodical presentation. University legal counsel estimates that discrimination lawsuits carry average settlements of $250,000 to $2.3 million, depending on damages and punitive awards. Dr. Hendricks finally spoke up. "Mr. Williams, what outcome are you seeking here?" Jerome turned to face her directly. "Systemic change, Dr. Hendricks. Not punishment for individuals, but transformation of institutional culture." He clicked to his final slide. Proposed remedial actions. First, mandatory bias training for all security and administrative staff, conducted quarterly, with certification requirements. President Mitchell nodded slowly. This was reasonable. Second, implementation of a real-time incident reporting system. Any discrimination complaint triggers immediate investigation and public transparency. Dr. Hendricks took notes frantically. Third, establishment of a community oversight board with diverse membership including students, faculty, staff, and community representatives. Jerome paused to let the implications sink in. Fourth, creation of a $500,000 scholarship fund for underrepresented veterans and their families, funded through existing budgets. The financial impact was significant but manageable for an institution of Stanford's resources. Fifth, zero-tolerance policy with clear consequences. First offense, mandatory training and probation. Second offense, termination. Thompson looked like he might collapse. Jerome closed his tablet and leaned back in his chair. These changes will cost approximately $1.2 million annually to implement and maintain. That represents 0.016% of our annual operating budget. President Mitchell was already calculating the alternative costs: legal fees, settlement payments, federal funding at risk, reputation damage. Jerome's proposal was actually the fiscally responsible choice. "What about accountability for today's incident?" President Mitchell asked. Jerome looked at Thompson, then at Dr. Hendricks. Both were waiting for their professional fates to be decided. "Mr. Thompson," Jerome said, "you have two options. Resign with full benefits and a neutral reference, or face a formal investigation that could result in termination for cause." Thompson's relief was visible. Termination for cause would have destroyed his pension and made future employment nearly impossible. "Dr. Hendricks," Jerome continued, "you'll lead the implementation of these new policies. Your performance review next year will be based entirely on measurable outcomes: incident reduction, training completion rates, and community feedback scores." It was a reprieve, but with accountability attached. President Mitchell looked around the room. "Jerome, this is a comprehensive proposal. The board will need to vote." "Actually," Jerome smiled slightly, "we don't need a full board vote for policy implementation. As chair of the Student Affairs Committee, I have authority to implement emergency measures related to campus safety and discrimination." Jerome had done his homework. He knew exactly what powers his position carried. "However," he continued, "I'd prefer full board support. This should be a collaborative effort, not a unilateral mandate." Dr. Hendricks looked up from her notes. "Mr. Williams, what about the media attention? The viral video?" Jerome had been waiting for this question. "The story is already out there. We can either be the university that tried to cover up discrimination, or the university that immediately implemented meaningful reform." He pulled up his phone and showed them the latest social media metrics. The original live stream had been viewed 89,000 times. News outlets from CNN to local stations were picking up the story. "We have approximately 18 hours before this becomes a national news cycle," Jerome explained. "If we announce comprehensive reforms by tomorrow morning, we control the narrative." President Mitchell understood. From discrimination incident to reform leadership in 24 hours. Exactly. Stanford becomes the model for how institutions should respond to bias incidents. Jerome stood and walked to the window overlooking the campus. Students were walking to dinner, backpacks slung over shoulders, lost in conversations about classes and weekend plans. Most had no idea that their university had just undergone a fundamental shift. "Gentlemen, Dr. Hendricks," Jerome said, turning back to the room, "we have an opportunity here, not just to address today's incident, but to create lasting change." He returned to his seat and opened his portfolio one final time, removing a handwritten letter. "This is from Deshawn," he said, placing it on the table. "He wrote it last night before today's ceremony." Jerome read aloud, "Dad, I know tomorrow will be emotional for both of us. Thank you for teaching me that service means more than wearing a uniform. It means making things better for the people who come after us." The room was quiet. "That's what we're doing here," Jerome concluded, "making things better for the people who come after us." President Mitchell looked around the table. Thompson was nodding, understanding that his career was being saved rather than destroyed. Dr. Hendricks was already planning implementation timelines. "All in favor of Mr. Williams's reform proposal?" President Mitchell asked. The vote was unanimous. Jerome packed his documents as the others filed out. In 12 hours, he'd gone from being discriminated against to architecting institutional change. But the real work was just beginning. 3 weeks later, the changes were already visible across Stanford's campus. Thompson had submitted his resignation the morning after the board meeting. His replacement, Maria Santos, was a former Navy security specialist with extensive diversity training. Her first act was implementing Jerome's new protocols. Dr. Hendricks threw herself into reform with the intensity of someone whose career depended on measurable results. The mandatory bias training program launched within 10 days, featuring real scenarios and immediate consequences for failure to complete certification. The Community Oversight Board held its first meeting in the same conference room where Jerome had presented his ultimatum. The 7-member panel included 2 students, 2 faculty members, 1 staff representative, and 2 community members. Their first case review, Thompson's incident, now designated as case number 01 in Stanford's new discrimination tracking system. The mobile app for incident reporting went live on a Tuesday morning. By Friday, it had logged 12 reports ranging from microaggressions in classrooms to accessibility barriers in dormitories. Each complaint triggered automatic investigation protocols and required administrative response within 48 hours. Jerome attended the app's launch presentation, watching as Dean of Students Sarah Martinez demonstrated the real-time dashboard that tracked every complaint from submission to resolution. Transparency isn't comfortable, Martinez admitted to the gathered administrators, but it's necessary. The $500,000 Veteran Scholarship Fund received its first applications within days of being announced. Deshawn, now Second Lieutenant Williams, helped review candidates during his brief leave before reporting to Fort Benning for officer training. "Dad," he said over dinner at their hotel, "what you did wasn't just about that day at the gate." Jerome looked up from his meal. "What do you mean?" "The scholarship applications, I've read them. These are kids whose parents served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, kids who've been carrying the weight of their family's service and their own dreams." Deshawn pulled out his phone, showing Jerome a letter from Maria Rodriguez, daughter of a Marine killed in Fallujah. She'd been working 3 jobs to pay for community college, dreaming of transferring to Stanford. "Now she can," Deshawn continued, "because you turned one moment of discrimination into systematic change." The federal compliance review that Jerome had anticipated arrived exactly 28 days after the incident. Department of Education investigators spent 3 days on campus, interviewing staff, reviewing policies, and examining Stanford's new bias prevention measures. Their preliminary report, obtained through sources Jerome preferred not to identify, praised Stanford's rapid and comprehensive response to identified deficiencies in campus climate. More importantly, the university's federal funding remained intact. The media attention had been intense, but largely positive. The New York Times ran a feature titled, "From Discrimination to Reform: How One University Changed Course." The Washington Post focused on Jerome's military background and his methodical approach to institutional change. CNN interviewed both Jerome and President Mitchell for a segment about bias in higher education. When asked about his motivation, Jerome's answer was simple. "I didn't want any other parent to experience what I experienced, and I didn't want any other student to be ashamed of their family." The viral video had been viewed 847,000 times across platforms. But Jerome was more interested in the metrics that mattered. Bias incident reports down 67%, training completion at 98%, and student satisfaction surveys showing marked improvement in campus climate scores. Mrs. Harrison, the parent who had tried to help during the original incident, joined the Community Oversight Board as a volunteer member. Her first initiative was expanding the reporting system to include positive interactions, creating a culture of recognition alongside accountability. Professor Mitchell from engineering became the faculty liaison for the Veteran Scholarship Program. His own experiences with subtle discrimination had made him an unexpected ally in Jerome's broader reform efforts. 6 months after graduation day, Stanford hosted its first Inclusive Excellence Conference, drawing administrators from universities across the country. Jerome delivered the keynote address to an audience of 400 higher education professionals. "Change doesn't require a crisis," he told them.
But the crisis reveals whether institutions are committed to their stated values or just their comfortable routines. The conference generated 23 formal partnerships with other universities implementing similar reform programs. Jerome's model was being replicated from UC Berkeley to Georgetown University. Deshawn, now stationed at Fort Benning, called his father after watching the keynote online. "Dad, you've created something bigger than Stanford." Jerome was in his home office, reviewing quarterly reports from the Oversight Board. Incident rates continued declining. Training scores remained high. The scholarship fund had grown to $750,000 through additional donations from alumni inspired by the story. "Son," Jerome replied, "systems change when people decide they're more committed to progress than to comfort." Through his window, Jerome could see his neighbor's son practicing soccer in the backyard. The boy was mixed race, maybe 8 years old, dreaming of futures that previous generations could barely imagine. Jerome thought about all the black stories, all the real-life stories, all the touching stories that never made headlines because the people experiencing discrimination didn't have the platform or power to create change. The work wasn't finished. It never would be. But for the first time in months, Jerome felt something that had been absent since that morning at Stanford's front gate: hope that the next generation might face fewer barriers than his own. 2 years later, Jerome Williams received an unexpected letter. It came from Marcus Thompson, the former head of security who had blocked his path that graduation day. The envelope was handwritten, mailed from Sacramento, where Thompson now worked for a community college known for its inclusive practices. "Mr. Williams," the letter began, "I know I have no right to contact you, but I need you to know something. The bias training program you created didn't just change Stanford, it changed me." Thompson described his new position working with diverse student populations, his volunteer work with veteran support groups, and his family's deeper conversations about privilege and assumption. "My daughter starts college next year," he wrote. "She's chosen Stanford because she wants to attend a university that learns how to do better. I never thought I'd be proud to say my actions contributed to that learning, but somehow I am." Jerome set the letter on his desk next to a stack of similar correspondence. Letters from parents who'd witnessed the incident, students who'd seen the viral video, administrators from dozens of universities implementing similar reforms. The touching stories kept coming. Real-life stories of change inspired by one moment when assumptions met accountability. Deshawn, now Captain Williams, had been deployed twice since graduation. During his last leave, he visited Stanford's campus and found his father's name on a bronze plaque in the main administration building, the Jerome Williams Initiative for Campus Inclusion. "Dad," Deshawn had said, reading the inscription aloud, "you turned the worst moment into something permanent." But Jerome knew the work was never finished. Just that morning, he'd reviewed incident reports from Stanford's system. The numbers were encouraging: bias complaints down 73% from pre-reform levels, with 89% of reported incidents resolved within the mandated 48-hour window. Other universities were reporting similar results. The Williams model, as education journals had begun calling it, was being implemented at 127 institutions across the country. Jerome's phone buzzed with a text from Maya Bennett, the student who had live-streamed the original incident. She was now a graduate student in journalism at Columbia, specializing in social justice reporting. "Mr. Williams, my thesis defense is next month. Topic: How social media accountability creates institutional change. Guess which case study is Chapter 1? Jerome smiled. Maya had turned that 11-minute live stream into a career dedicated to amplifying voices that might otherwise go unheard. The real victory wasn't in the policies or procedures or oversight committees. It was in the countless moments that would never become viral videos because discrimination was being prevented rather than punished. Parents who would attend graduations without question. Students who would report bias knowing their voices mattered. Administrators who would pause before making assumptions.
Jerome thought about all the black stories that still needed telling, all the life stories that deserved dignity, all the touching stories waiting to inspire change. The work continued. If this story resonated with you, share your own experiences with bias or discrimination in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your story could be the catalyst for change in your community. Tag someone who needs to understand that real transformation is possible when courage meets accountability. Subscribe to the Black Voices Speak channel for more stories of resilience, reform, and the quiet power of refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. Together, we can ensure that respect isn't determined by assumptions, but by our shared humanity.